I've got a 2004 Corvette Z06 here in the garage, and I thought I would point out a few of what I think are its neat features. One of the things to remember about the Corvette is it's a pretty low car, and one of the ways they get the profile so low is it uses a leaf spring for the suspension as opposed to like a coilover or McPherson strut. So this big black kind of beam right here is actually a leaf spring, and it connects to one control arm. There's a bolt in there, and it goes all the way across through the middle of the car to the other wheel. So there's one leaf spring, and it springs both wheels. Try to get down low so you can see that bar going across there inside the aluminum subframe that holds the engine. And what that allows them to do on the side is the spring is low and connected to the bottom control arm, so they actually have an upper control arm. So it's really a double wishbone suspension, which is a pretty good design. One of the things about a double wishbone suspension is when the suspension moves up, it's pretty good at keeping the wheel, the hub, parallel to the road surface. Where if you have a McPherson strut, you have more of a triangle configuration, and so it can change your static alignment more. So we have our lower control arm, which is here, and it looks like this car has the camber kit. This little plate is holding this bolt off center. If this bolt was more in the middle of the frame, this whole control arm would be pulled in, which would make this pivot point for the hub a little further in, which would give you less negative camber. But for the track, we usually like to run a lot of negative camber. So between the two wishbones, we have the shock absorber, right? And that's kind of mounted in a kind of an angled position there, so it clears the wishbones. And then, of course, you have your top wishbone up here, and you have these little tabs that mount between the body and the bushings for the control arms, and that's actually for your alignment, how you can fine-tune your camber. Of course, if you move outward from the body or inward to the body, you change the tilt of the wheel, but you can also change your caster with those. If you put shims under one side, then this joint up here, right here on the control arm, is going to move forward or backward. It's going to kind of, pivot around one way or the other. And the caster angle is the angle that the two pivot points make if you draw a straight line to the ground. So if you went from the bottom control arm pivot and the top control arm pivot, if that was at a 3-degree angle tilted from horizontal, the car would have 3 degrees of caster. And then of course camber is measured this way, tilted in, and then you've got your toe. So on your steering tie rod, so this is connected to the steering rack. When you turn the steering wheel, this pushes and pulls and causes this hub to to pivot around those two wishbones and do your turning. So your toe adjustment is if the wheels are pointed straight ahead, or if they're pointed inward a little bit or pointed outward a little bit. So it's a pretty clever design. It's got this car's a pretty heavy sway bar. The sway bar is connected with drop links to the lower control arms on both sides. But it's well designed. Lots of cast aluminum parts, a fair amount of adjustability, pretty solid and beefy looking ball joints. It's nicely done. I like it. It's got looks like a single piston or a twin piston floating caliper, which seems functional. So it's not necessarily as high tech as a monoblock aluminum caliper, but I think it gets the job done. Now the rear suspension of the Corvette is just about the same. It's got the same leaf spring, right? That's this big long black bar that is going from side to side. Again, it's supported in the middle. And this, the Corvette is a transaxle car. So it's got the transmission in the rear with the differential kind of bolted right behind it. And then there's a drive shaft coming up from where the engine is in the front. And they do this to help keep the weight distribution even by putting a large heavy thing at the rear of the car, the transmission, to offset the large heavy thing in the front of the car, the engine. So it's a pretty neat design. So then here's your your rear differential right here between the exhaust pipes. But for the rear suspension, you've got, again, that leaf spring, and it's connected to the lower control arm, which is this big casting here. And again, it's got its pivot points on the subframe, and it's got a ball joint holding up the hub, and then it's got an upper wishbone with the upper ball joint, and then the upper wishbone connects to the chassis here as well. Now you don't have the same adjustability on the upper wishbone as you have in the front, which means you're a little bit more limited in your camber adjustments. It looks like these are slots on the lower control arm, so you loosen those, and as you move that in and out from the slot, that's going to tilt the wheel in or out on the outboard side. So that's your rear camber adjustment. And then it has what looks like a tie rod, just like the front has, but if you look, the tie rod is just bolted to the subframe right here. So it doesn't push or pull like a steering tie rod would. So they usually call it like a toe link because it's rigid. It's a link, but you can adjust it. So you can loosen up the lock nut and spin this to thread it in or out. And what that's going to do is that's going to point the fronts of the wheels towards each other or away from each other, and that's your toe adjustment in the front. And it's got the shock absorber, again, at an angle. Ideally, you want the shock as straight as possible, but they are dealing with a little bit of a space constraint here. And they also, of course, have to make room for the drive shaft. You see the rubber boots over the CV joints and the drive shaft going through the middle there. So again, pretty well designed. They had to pack a lot of junk in there, but they did it. They got it all to fit, and they used good quality components, a lot of aluminum castings, a lot of beefy big joints. So it's pretty good. The calipers are here. I think these calipers are mounted on the wrong sides. You usually want the bleeder at the top and your feed line at the bottom because the air bubbles have to float up. So I'm going to have to talk to the owner, and we're going to have to get that corrected. Some more things I like about the Corvette and its construction is it's a metal kind of a unibody chassis, or unibody ladder frame kind of a chassis. So like a ladder frame, you think of two C channels or almost like I-beams running the length of the car that are usually riveted or welded together, and then things bolt to them. But what you have here, so the black that I'm looking at, the black parts on both sides, those are steel. So you have kind of like a steel channel, so it's got lots of material going in the vertical plane, like the web of an I-beam, so it's pretty structural. And it's nicely welded together. You see the main frame rails here that the subframe bolts to on both sides, and so there's kind of these two hulls, almost like canoe hulls that make up the body of the car. But to save weight, this panel is aluminum, and this is actually just held in with an adhesive or an epoxy. You can see that epoxy sticking out in a few spots. So by keeping the floor pans aluminum, they save weight, and but the main steel structure is pretty rigid. They've run the exhaust on the bottom of the tunnel. We can't see it, but above this plate is the drive shaft. So the drive shaft is up there as well. So the tunnel is pretty tall, and again, a taller tunnel will make it more rigid. It sacrifices a little cabin space, but again, you need your car to be rigid so the suspension does its job as much as possible. And then the body panels are plastic, of course, and the body panels are just fastened to that steel structure. And then in the front, you can see that frame rail again up here, the subframe, which is cast aluminum bolting to it. And then you can see they used some steel bar stock to kind of weld up a little support frame that holds the radiator and the AC condenser and the front bumper and your headlight mechanisms and all of that. But it's it's pretty nicely designed and laid out. At the rear here, we have dual gas tanks, kind of saddle gas tanks. Gas, when you hold a lot of gas, it's a fair amount of weight. You want to keep that weight pretty low, and you want to keep it even on both sides of the car. So they have two gas tanks, one on either side of the transmission, and they're connected to one filler neck. So when you fill them up, they fill up simultaneously, and then each one has a pump to draw from it. and it's, you know, it's again, it's pretty well thought out. Here you can see the frame rails coming backward, you know, supporting to the rear of the car. This particular car has had the floor of the trunk cut out for easy access. You can see the fasteners there to quickly, the Zeus fasteners to quickly bolt it in, just to cover that up. But again, I'm impressed with the Corvette. It's well designed. It's you know, well thought out. It's real purpose built, keeping the center of gravity low. Sophisticated suspension design. It's a neat car, and they're very capable, especially on the track. They're very capable on the track, and a joy to drive. Of course, what really makes the Corvette a unique car is its engine. Its LS engine, all aluminum V8 pushrod engine. You know, this Z06 is rated at 405 horsepower, which is a frickin' lot of power. But they keep the engine pretty low, mounted in the car, and back pretty far. If you actually look from here, I'll try to step back a little bit, you actually see that the front of the engine is about in line with the center line of the front wheels. So, you know, really the engine is behind, the bulk of the engine is behind the wheels, so it helps keep the weight towards the center of the car a little bit. You know, relatively accessible. I don't think you're going to be changing headers in the car, but you could certainly change an alternator with ease. You know, bleed your brakes over here. This is the master cylinder and the reservoir for the brakes, and then this is for your clutch, the reservoir for your clutch system, your hydraulic clutch. It's got a plastic intake plenum to again save weight, keep the components that are high up in the car as light as possible, and then it gets its air right from the front. So there's a grill, and the air cleaner is behind that kind of rectangular housing here, and it just goes through the mass airflow sensor, measures how much air comes into the car, and goes right to your throttle body right here, and then into your plenum and to the cylinders.